Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Why Music podcast, the podcast where we explore different musicians and their music throughout history. Today, we're going to learn about a really fascinating lady called Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Rosetta was born on the 20th of March 1915 in a place called Cotton Plant, which is in Woodruff County, which is in Arkansas. If you don't know much about Arkansas, there are a few famous people who have come from that state, such as Maya Angelou, who was a poet and civil rights activist, and the father and son, Art Porter Sr. and Art Porter Jr., who were both jazz musicians. It was very clear to many people that Rosetta had a talent for music. She was singing in choirs and she was playing the guitar when she was only 4 years old. And she traveled around with her mum, performing at different churches around the southern states of America. In many churches, people often refer to each other as brother or sister, and that's why we know her now not as Rosetta Tharpe, but Sister Rosetta Tharpe. As time went by, Rosetta became more and more well known as an excellent gospel singer. And the problem started to happen when she started to record music that had elements of rock and roll and other elements of music which weren't to do with gospel. Many Christians were very angry at that, but her singing and guitar playing were loved by so many other people all across America. It's important to remember that this is the 1930s, and these days we're really used to seeing women sing and play the guitar at the same time. For example, women like Tracy Chapman, Taylor Swift, Joni Mitchell, and Leanne LaHavas, for example, are well known for singing and playing the guitar. But back in the 1930s, it was much rarer to see a woman playing an instrument and being known for playing an instrument, far less a black woman in those times. It's also important to remember that, again, back in those days, attitudes towards sexuality was very different. There are many sources which suggest that Sister Rosetta was queer. Now, if that's true, it's totally understandable why she didn't make it public herself. I mean, think about it, right? What would the church people say? What do you think they would have said? What do you think the average person would have thought of her if they knew that? To put all of this into context, Hattie McDaniel became the first black person to win an Oscar in 1944, but she wasn't even allowed to attend the movie premiere which she won the Oscar for because of segregation. So bearing that in mind, what do you think life was like for black women such as Hattie McDaniel or Sister Rosetta at the time? Even though she faced a lot of discrimination in her life, she recorded in the 1930s and the 1940s songs like Strange Things Happen Every Day. Have a listen to that song. It's really interesting. And it's more interesting to know that nowadays it's called one of the first ever rock and roll recordings. You can hear many different elements of blues, such as call and response and the chord structures that the song uses. And of course, you can always hear her roots in gospel music. She was a dynamic performer who had amazing stage presence, and she also had this amazing ability to get the audiences involved in her performances, and she captivated them with her incredible guitar solos. Thankfully for her, she also became popular abroad, and she toured around Europe in the 1950s and the 1960s with other famous musicians such as Muddy Waters and Otis Spann. Now, question for you. Have you ever heard of the singer Little Richard? Well, I bet you didn't know this, but Sister Rosetta first heard him sing when he was 14 years old, and she put him on stage with her, which was actually his first ever public performance. Now, if it wasn't for that moment, if it wasn't for her generosity, maybe we'd never have got to hear songs like Tutti Frutti or Good Golly Miss Molly. In her career, she also influenced so many other musicians, including people you might have heard of before: Meatloaf, Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, Aretha Franklin, and others. Even Johnny Cash called her his favorite singer growing up. She broke so many barriers because of her race, because of her sexuality, that even though she was technically a gospel singer, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017. Unfortunately, she died from complications from diabetes when she was only 58 years old in 1973, but her music and her influence have made an indelible mark on music history. So, as usual, I have a couple questions for you. Question number 1. Why do you think some Christians were unhappy with Sister Rosetta singing non-religious music? Question number 2. We always call Elvis the king of rock and roll, right? But maybe Sister Rosetta should be called the queen of rock and roll. What do you think? Thank you for listening to this episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it and you've learned something as well. But before we go, I have a quick fact for you. Tell me something good. In 1951, Rosetta got married in front of thousands of people in a baseball stadium. It was actually Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., and approximately 25,000 people attended the wedding and the concert. That, my friends, is a lot of confetti. So on that note, thank you for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you've been enjoying these episodes and this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe and you share it with your friends. If you want to follow us on social media, just simply type in The Why Books on Instagram or Twitter and you'll find us there. So until next episode, take care of yourselves, listen to some great music, especially Sister Rosetta, and peace.